16th Street, that was an X, the front of the one that had an X was an X. And the back was an X.
When is the trucks one?
Is it good?
Pick up garbage.
Rest of the time,
They start at
2 minutes.
7:30.
1:50.
You got here early.
So the back lot has it, and the lots of,
I don't
it
know what
wouldn't
time
be
they
much
get.
anymore.
Can't see you.
Must be early.
You'll be on Thursday.
It should be soon. Hey, babe, how you doing?
Usually I do later in the week, it's the
Well, you just get one. Right now, we'll pick up one. Half gets picked up Monday, the other half gets picked up Thursday.
Hey, is that thing hooked up?
It says it is, but I haven't heard it make any noise, that's why I just turned it
Okay.
up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Time. Time. Official timer, all right. Good afternoon, let's call the meeting to order. It's Tuesday, January the 15th. We're here at City Hall for our regular weekly meeting. We'll stand for a moment of silence, followed by the pledge of allegiance. Thank you. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Ladies, for the record, we have, we'll call the roll.
All right, Mr. McLaughlin.
Here.
Ms. Albright.
Here.
Mayor Kathy.
Here.
Mr. Wallace. Mr. Putnam.
Here.
And before we get started,
Yes.
I'm working on a better location. I keep getting emails about this location. We don't have a lot of options. I'm still trying to find a spot.
Okay, did that answer some questions? All right, as we have done in the past, we will not have, quote, a public comment, but as the items come up, everyone will be given an opportunity. How many are in the hall behind you? Roughly? No? Okay, okay. So everybody that's can sort of hear what's going on. Same over here. All right, then we will move forward. Let's see. Tanya, why don't you just take the agenda and
Okay.
let us go.
Okay, so comprehensive plan, we've talked about that a lot over the last year. I just wanna highlight some changes. We had these discussions both in, the council meeting last week as well as planning and zoning last night. I just wanna highlight the changes that are different than what's in the version you received on Friday. And if you guys are comfortable with this, then we'll make those changes before it's transmitted.
Just big picture. We're gonna do an overview of what's in the latest and greatest draft of the comp plan. Then we'll have a hearing to
Right.
get public participation, then the council will deliberate and act.
Could we
Thank
start with the changes?
I think that's the best thing to do.
Okay, start with changes, okay. So modify policy 1.1.2 as described in the plan. This is the height for properties shall be measured as follows. The properties landward of the coastal construction control line with, within the floodplain. No, it should be outside the floodplain, sorry, that's a typo. Outside the floodplain and including unshaded zone X on the best available FEMA flood insurance rate map. Maximum height shall be measured from 1 foot above the crown of the road directly adjacent to the property or highest adjacent grade. If there is more than one road adjacent to the property, then the road providing access shall be used. That's if you're not in the floodplain, that's just how your height's gonna be measured going forward. You're 32 feet. Any questions? Okay. For properties landward of the CCCL within zones A, E, B, E, or shaded zone X on the best available FEMA flood insurance rate map, maximum height shall be measured from the city's minimum finished floor elevation, and we'll talk about that when we get to the floodplain, discussion. So basically, if you're in a flood zone, we require you to go up a foot, your 32 feet will start above that foot. So you're not gonna be penalized with your 32 feet height. Then the third one is the same it's always been. For property seaward of the CCCL, maximum height shall be measured from the base Florida DEP requirement, outside of our control. Okay, any questions on that change? Pretty
I have a
straightforward.
comment. Okay, Jim Bush, 130 Palm Street. I can't comment for everybody on the planning and zoning board, but I can comment for the majority. Is that we think by using the finished floor elevation, it complicates things over just using base flood elevation. Base flood elevation is easy for everybody to understand. We had 5 or 6 questions last night at our meeting based on what is the finished floor elevation. And if the people that work with us all the time are confused about that, I can imagine your average Joe looking at the comp plan won't have a clue what you're talking about.
When we go through, what the P and Z hasn't seen is what we're about to go through. Guess we can wait and go through that. I don't know how to make it any more clear, but this is what we're doing. We can't we're not gonna measure base flood elevation because we're freeboarding, and we'll explain that.
Any other comments?
I got one question regarding the finished floor. Lance Watson, Southeast Consulting Engineers. That for the 1 foot above base flood for the finished floor, that, I'm assuming that's a AE flood designation.
We're not saying 1 foot for anything in the floodplain. 1 or your 5, that's only, the 1 foot is only for those outside the floodplain.
Okay, so for the AE, VE, where it's measured from finished floor, so an AE requirement is the freeboard to the finished floor and VE, freeboard to lowest horizontal structural member, which would raise the finished floor up higher than that 1 foot. Does that height still go from the finished floor or the lowest horizontal?
From the finished floor.
Okay.
Okay. All right, the next policy, this is the policy we've talked about to allow the folks whose homes were destroyed or over 50% damaged to be able to rebuild to the same density. We talked about it back and forth, the best way to approach it, and here's some language that we're proposing. Parcels of record or recorded platted lots that are within a land use category that allows for residential development, that would include anybody in tourist commercial, general commercial, and that existed on or prior to the original adoption date of this plan shall not be prohibited by applicable density requirements from having the same number of dwelling units as existed on them October 9th, 2018. There was some concern last night at P&Z that there were a couple of parcels down 98 where they were built after 1991, but they exceeded density. Probably shouldn't have been allowed to build at that density since it was not according to the comp plan and LDR, but they were. So this will take care of those as well.
Questions?
Can you read that again, please? Because that's different from what, so that's new from last night.
Yep, remember last night we said we would go back and look at those, and this is the change from last night.
Okay, can you read that?
It basically is the exact same thing, except we added, as existed on them October 9th, 2018. As existed on those lots,
It's also,
effective the day before the storm.
it's intended to address not just a scenario where there'd be one dwelling unit rebuilt, it could allow for multiple dwelling units to be rebuilt if you were starting off with a parcel that had multiple units.
Okay, so, so it's the platted lot thing that kinda, I think, is throwing us. I have to think about that, cause I don't know if it addresses it or not. There's so many weird scenarios, of properties, like a quadruplex that you have 2 up and 2 down. Okay, sometimes the property appraiser, so that incorporates all of these, and the date is still 1991?
The date is, that existed on them, that existed on that lot, October 9th, 2018, the day
Okay.
before the storm.
Okay.
So for some, we had quadplexes or triplexes on lots that allow a single family. We can go back triplex and
Yep,
quadplex.
that's what this says. It was there the day before the storm.
I have a comment again. To me, it's unfair to allow those people who are non-conforming to rebuild when you're not allowing anybody else that's non-conforming to build, particularly since they couldn't have built a non-conforming structure without the city giving its approval.
Well, and that's exactly why we should do it, because the city approved it.
Yeah, but we should do it for everybody that was in a non-conforming structure, not just those.
Well, it's everyone, this is density. So all we're looking at is density. We're not looking at impervious, we're not looking at setbacks, this is just density. This is to allow, if you had the same number of dwelling units to be rebuilt, if you had it before the storm, you still have that density.
Can I make just a comment for procedure, since we have a hearing coming up? It probably makes sense to have some questions and answer, just to clarify what this stuff means, but as far as, I don't agree with this is how I feel, that'd be better to be held for the hearing, so we get everything. in
We'll
the
just
right
go
order.
through it, I'll open the hearing, everybody, that's the time.
Now, the one point that I wanna bring up on this policy, 1.8.3, is we have our Mexico Beach Shopping Center. It's the only shopping center in town, they have their own stormwater drainage. Some of those buildings were substantially damaged, some of them were not. So I just wanna make sure that we're not gonna have any issues for those folks, because we want them to be able to rebuild. They have to meet building code, but I don't think the density is an issue, it's general commercial.
Density is only about dwelling units.
Right, so we're good. I can't think of anything that we would be, that we would have to exempt.
It just might be an impervious surface issue, I don't know.
And that, they could handle that by redesigning the parking. I don't know enough about the
Yeah,
property.
well, it's 90% in commercial, 90% impervious.
It's common
so-
parking for the whole area, and the stormwater input.
Right, and it's 90% impervious already, so it should, I can't imagine that.
I don't know if it's 100% physically right now or 90% physically right now, but you do have 90% in the policy.
I think we're gonna be okay. We have, pervious area at the front. I think we'll just have to take a closer, we'll have to look at that. But that may be the only one, so I didn't know if we could, I mean, to say we're gonna redesign the parking lot, that would be a cost that they're all gonna share when some of them aren't substantially damaged, so. Just trying to think of a way that we could provide an exemption so that we don't get into all of those and then end up having to redesign.
My suggestion would be, since we're about to have a transmittal hearing, we don't have all the information, we probably look at that following the transmittal hearing later on. If we need to make adjustments, we still have opportunities. We may have ways to adopt the rules as is and do a variance later on. There are a lot of factors here.
Right.
It would be hard to adjust at the
Yeah,
last
and we
minute.
don't know, so, okay, so if you guys are comfortable with that, then what we'll do is if we see that we need to make some type of an adjustment, we can just amend it.
Your goal is to continue to
Not.
have a shopping center
Yeah,
there.
exactly.
That's clear,
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay.
I do have another question on that, if everybody's done with that one. And if this isn't the time to stop me, but, as far as the dwelling units and,
That's coming up when we get to the hearing.
okay,
Anything to do with what we're talking about is fixing to be
Okay.
open for a hearing.
perfect.
There was some concern about the policy 1.8.4, working waterfront shall be protected by prohibiting the approval of any new residential subdivision along the access road between the working waterfront and Highway 98. We just deleted that policy. There's protections in the coastal element for working waterfront, so we just removed that. And then we added the policy, any development activity that directly impacts the 100-year floodplain, such as filling, shall be required to mitigate said impact. So if you bring it in one area, you gotta dig it out in another area. Okay. And then the, table 9.2, we just updated our numbers, since the storm. Everything's changed, so. So those were the only changes since Friday. Okay.
For the council, any questions before we go to the hearing? What happened to the thing about the marinas?
That's in the coastal element, which is already done, so Nick and I talked that if we need to make change to that, we can come back to that
Come back
later,
later.
because it's already been transmitted. We just took out the one that had that, the requirement, and
I
we
thought
can
that
look
had
at
been
it later.
transmitted, but I think it's important to not lose sight of
Right,
that
right.
section.
Yeah, we need to circle back around after the moratorium and look at that.
Okay. All right, let's, we're gonna open the floor for a public hearing, which will allow questions concerning the comp plan. So just sort of, really no formal way, because we don't have a podium, so you just sort of, you had one earlier that I stopped you, go ahead and come back with it.
Okay, Lance Watson, Southeastern Consulting Engineers. My questions regarding the density in the dwelling units staying the same is more of a parking question. Some of these duplexes, triplexes, and commercial buildings and you know, things of that nature had parking spaces either in the 20-foot setback or some in the right of way. How will those be taken care of for substantial damage and rebuild? If the density staying the same?
Well, if we're gonna leave, this is, to me, if we're gonna say we're gonna leave the density the same, we can't say that and then hold those other, the same standards, new standards, because then they, in essence, wouldn't be able to build back.
So they could still park in the same areas they were parking?
Yeah, if they're parking in the DOT right of way today, we don't really have any control over that, so we have no language in our comp plan governing that.
Okay.
That's between the owner and DOT.
Okay,
Yeah, when they apply for a permit, that's part of the DOT process.
okay, thank you.
Okay?
The present language though, and Alara or Tanya, please correct me if I'm incorrect. So we're saying you wouldn't be prohibited by density requirements, but you still do have to meet some other rules. So if you don't have sufficient parking based on your prior design, you might have to reconfigure, you might need to adjust your footprint, you might need to put parking underneath. It's not written currently, so that you're also getting a waiver from something like a parking rule.
Right, and the parking requirements are actually in the land development regulations, which is not as firm of a policy. It's
Right.
easier to change, it's easier to work with at the local level.
Easier to
Than the
grant
land.
variances on, so,
Yes.
yeah.
So if that's it on that, but that will become an issue on some of these. The parking, not necessarily the number of parking spaces, because they can build up and add under it, but the locations, being able to use the same areas.
Well, again, for me, if we're trying to put back and allow those small parcels that were in existence prior to the storm, I would hope that we as a government would then look at how that could be accomplished. I mean, there's no sense giving you just a piece of the pie.
Right. Okay.
Per se.
Right.
But there are some, I mean, I don't know all of them, but I'm sure there are some that will have to come and say, here's what I need to do, and is this gonna work?
Right.
So, I mean, it's just sort of gotta be a work in progress, but at least it, to me, what this language does, it gives those an opportunity to put back what they had.
Right, okay.
And I think that was the whole purpose of certainly was my goal.
All right.
Not to put more, but to
Right.
at least have, okay, other questions? Just speak up.
Is it about anything? I mean,
Is anything on the comp plan?
Okay. The 50% rule for non-conforming properties, I'm not talking about the new language. I'm talking about, it's still in there, correct? That if a property is damaged over 50%, then they have to build to the new code. Right. So, I've been in real estate for a long time, and I've read that over and over and over again, and never had any issues with it until this storm, because what they use to determine the 50% damage is the assessed value of the building. Well, what that does is basically, and you all know this because you've been dealing with it, it basically, what's the word I want? Penalizes properties that have been homesteaded for years, because their assessed value is kept low. So I'm wondering if there's some way we can change that language so that it doesn't penalize in the future. It doesn't penalize properties that have been homesteaded for years.
That's that requirement is statutory, but with the SDE process for the storm, you can appeal it. And we, as of last Friday, we had 59 appeals. They were all granted. They brought in documentation that showed the true value, either an appraisal or the value as determined by their insurance company. And we use those values. So that's the whole appeal process.
And that can be used in the future, not just in
We just
relationship
use
to
that
the
for
storm.
Michael in the future. I would,
It says fair market analysis.
yeah, and that's the.
I just, that would be my
we use it for that.
concern, because you're, I understand what you're doing at this particular time, and kudos to you for doing that. I'm just worried about in the
Well,
future.
right now it says fair market in the comp plan. That's what's in the comp plan now, fair market. But for the SDE we did for FEMA, we used the appraised value. That's what we had to use. In the comp plan, it says fair market value.
January 31st to appeal.
Which is still quite low.
No, you mean from the property appraiser side, fair market value from the property
It
appraiser?
just says fair market value. in the
Oh,
comp
fair
plan.
market value, got it, okay, all right, yep, okay.
Ken,
You okay?
you had said it January
You've approved
31st
59 out of
deadline
59
to
appeals,
appeal the
is that
SDE.
accurate?
Pardon?
You've approved 59 out of 59 appeals for people?
We only denied one so far.
Is it appropriate for me to make my comment at this time? Or is it-
Absolutely.
Okay, you granted a grandfathering ability for the people that have non-conforming structures due to density. That gives them an equitable advantage over everybody else in Mexico Beach that had a non-conforming structure for any other reason. And my position is those non-conforming structures could not have been built without some complicity on the part of the city. Either the city turned an eye to what they were doing, or the city granted permission for a non-conforming structure to be built. And I think penalizing those people is unfair if the city was complicit in doing that, plus giving the people that have non-conforming structures due to density an advantage over them. You're not treating everybody equitably.
Can you give us an example of a non-conforming that the city would have allowed that's, we're penalizing?
Somebody, if their setbacks weren't accurate, weren't correct.
Setbacks, the council can grant a variance on setbacks. That's not in the comp plan. They can get the same setback variance opportunity as someone with any other non-conforming structure.
Yeah, a height restriction.
We didn't grant any exemptions for height for anyone.
Well, but there are buildings here that are much higher than from what you're telling me there aren't? Okay, well, I'll take it back.
The setback issue is gonna be a big deal, but there aren't even any setbacks in your comp plan, so that's a discussion to have in the upcoming weeks as part of your LDR. Cause you obviously had places in the city where buildings butt right up next to each other, and that violates setbacks, but we have to address that in the LDR.
So given that case, then are we gonna change the zoning map to reflect what actually is in the future, rather than what has been? Because of all the residences we currently have built in general commercial property?
We don't have changes to the zoning map proposed. One reason why we wouldn't do that is if you go and change someone's comp plan or zoning category, and they don't volunteer to do it, and you're allowing them fewer uses, fewer densities, fewer everything, they're not gonna be happy about that, and we're gonna have various challenges at the city level, and it's gonna be complicated and expensive.
Can we have something then that reflects reality rather than what it's supposed to be?
Well, I don't think we have a lot of instances where, say for instance, I think what you're probably talking about is like a house in general commercial. Well, we still allow a house in general commercial, so it doesn't violate, that is reality.
May I interject another reality? 1985, I purchased my warehouse property. 1985 as general commercial. 1988, at a stroke of a pen, unbeknownst to me, it suddenly became residential, low density.
You didn't like that, did you?
No,
That's what we're not doing that right now, that's not. What
well, the point is, I have no control over Michael erasing me off the map, but I also have no control over the city taking me out of the business. I'm mad about that. I've challenged it twice over the course of time. Would this not be a good opportunity to put it back to general commercial? Its best use? Who would, in their right mind, would build a house next to the clamor and clutter, and no disrespect to the maintenance group, who in their right mind would build a house next to the water tank and next to the clamor and clutter of the maintenance facility? Tell me.
I can speak to that. I don't know how it got changed. I don't know, but I did know that there were a few parcels around town that somehow got changed back in those days. I wasn't part of it.
Well,
But
I can
I
tell
think
you
you
the
have a
reason.
valid point about if the reality of that particular parcel might be something that we wanna look at.
Well, don't we have the ability, and I'm
To
just
rezone it.
asking.
To rezone it.
If it's.
You could make a simple
Oh,
request,
I know, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
instead of trying to figure out who, what, when, and where, just make a simple request. And the reality and the.
This will have been my third request.
Really?
Yes, I challenged it in, I believe, 1990. I challenged it again in 1995.
But we're a long way
And,
away.
and they called it spot zoning.
My suggestion would be, what I was just gonna say, is to simply make another request. That's what I would do.
I think that makes it more of a, I would hate to see the council or anyone else, because of the length of time between the last request and now, because of the amount of time it's been rezoned as it is, right or wrong, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's, but I think it needs to be more formal, that the city, instead of just saying, oh, we're going to do it and put it back, to have you come and say, and let's do it formally. I understand where you are, I understand, I don't particularly have a problem with it, but I think it needs to go through that formal process from my point of view.
All right, other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Okay. If I'm in the next flood zone now, am I still in the next flood
We're
zone?
gonna be talking about that next, we'll be going through all that with you.
Okay, and what is the finished floor elevation? Sorry, not a contractor.
The finished floor is the floor you walk on.
Okay. And what is yours? That's what we're gonna be talking about in a few minutes. All right.
Yeah, we're gonna get to the flood.
You wanna know, I just wanna know how high I have to go. How high you have to go.
There you go.
And that's what we're gonna talk about.
We're on the comp plan right now. Okay, we're gonna come to that. Other comp plan related to either the sheet that's been passed around or the comp plan in general? Can't see. Okay, I'm gonna close the public hearing and open the discussion. This is do we have to have more than one public hearing? or is this the
This
vote
is,
to accept these?
this will be, that was the hearing, and you'll eventually have a vote to transmit the latest version of the comprehensive plan. We'll combine.
But not today.
Well, it'll probably go tomorrow to
Yeah,
the
it can
state.
vote
We vote today.
We have a,
Yeah, vote
we
today.
vote today.
Okay, that's what,
Now we'll
Then you
send
get
it to the state, and then
Oh, I know.
next,
There's a
next
time.
Monday, you're gonna have a first hearing on the ordinance that would adopt this, and then we'll wait until we hear back from the state. They'll say, this law looks fine, or they'll give comments that we'll adjust for. Then we'll have the last hearing to finally formally adopt everything. We anticipate that being February fifth, but if the state has comments and we can't work things out as quickly as we'd like to, it could get pushed back.
So you have 2 more public hearings.
Right.
but we want to formally adopt with the modifications today.
You wanna formally transmit.
Right. We want to approve the transmittal to the state.
All right, Chair will entertain a motion
I have a
to,
question.
okay?
All right, under tourist commercial density, would we be adopting no more than 18 per acre?
That's what it is today, we're
And
not changing.
what is it now? It's not-
18.
Is it? Okay.
Tourist commercial.
Okay,
Yeah.
You're probably thinking about the
Yeah.
tourist residential.
Yeah.
proposal.
Other questions? Okay, Chair will again entertain a motion to accept the transmittal of the comp plan with those modifications or changes that were presented over.
Make a motion to accept the changes to the comp plan and for the transmittal of the comp plan to Cohasset.
To the state.
So that would be, I'm happy to be wrong on this, I just wanna make sure we get this exactly right. That's the version of the comp plan that went online, that everyone read over the weekend, plus this one page of changes, correct?
Yes,
Everybody clear about that? I think I was clear. Okay, we have a motion, second by Mr. Putnam. Call the roll, please.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yes.
Ms. Albrecht?
yes.
Mayor Kathy?
Yes.
Mr. Putnam?
Yes. All right, moving on. Floodplain discussion, number 2.
Okay. First of all, I want to let you know that there is a PowerPoint, what we're going through this morning is in a PowerPoint, it's gonna be on the city's website. I think it's out there already, so this will give you everything we're saying, it's gonna give you it today, so you can print that if you need it. The flood map, it's the best available, we'll probably put it on the, inside the bulletin board out front, so people can come look at it, and then we'll be, putting it on the website if it's not already. I think Northwest Florida will be releasing it as well today. So. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna let Dina just talk through the data that we used first of all, and then we'll talk about our recommendations.
We'll make one very big picture comment before anyone gets too worried. We're not adopting something today. This is a discussion of the recommendation that the staff and engineers have. We'll do this by ordinance, which we will probably begin that process next meeting, depending on how the discussion goes.
Thank you. Okay, so if we could get you guys maybe the part, so everyone can see it.
And you can see it up here too.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
Hang on, move back.
So I'm just gonna explain the data that we use to analyze what happened during Michael and also to analyze the newest maps that FEMA's, their draft preliminary data or draft best available data. They haven't actually formally released the maps. So what we used was the draft best available data, which is the latest map that's, that will be coming out on Northwest Florida Water Management's portal, and I think we're gonna put the link up so everyone can go and see it, and then we'll also have a version here. That map includes 2017 topography, so it's been updated to reflect, the latest topography as of a year ago. And then it also includes post-Michael topography, and I'm gonna advance the slide. If you look at the right-hand side, everything in green is the 2017 topography. Then The new maps also incorporate the yellow portion, which is post-Michael topography. And the reason I believe that they went back and looked at that is that our dune system is gone. So without the dunes, we're more susceptible to surge and storms. So that's really what this is showing, is just the portion that they went back and looked at again post-storm. We also looked at recorded storm surge from Michael, and then Bay County projected surge. I'll advance it again to show you that. So the left-hand side, and this is also on the wall, you can look at it afterwards. The green is all of the areas within town that were recorded to have had surge and been submerged underwater. The numbers show the elevation. That's not how deep the water is, that's an elevation. So how deep it is depends on that elevation versus where the ground is. But as you can see, nearly every part of the city during Michael was submerged. The map on the right-hand side shows Bay County's projections for storm surge for different category hurricanes. You can see them at the bottom. A 1 is blue, a 2 is green, and then 3 and 4 are the orange and yellow, and 5 is the red. So we looked at this and we were surprised to find that even in a Cat 3 or a Cat 4, well, obviously in a Cat 4, but in a Cat 3 storm, a significant portion of our city is susceptible to storm surge.
I just wanna make a comment, what you saw between the projected Bay County, that's been out there for many years. And what happened in a 4 and a 5 is exactly what was projected. So if you look at, a Cat 3, you would still have the same type of flooding. So when people say, well, one storm doesn't change it, we're not looking at Michael, we're looking at projections and best available data.
We also looked at what we call a LIMWA, and that is, it stands for Limit of Moderate Wave Action. Basically what that means is there's wave action that happens with surge, and FEMA can estimate based on different flood events how big those waves are. In Michael, I think we heard we had waves of 3 to 6 feet. In other storms, it may be 3 feet and then further inland 1.5 feet. So we looked at wave action as well, because the only portion, if you're looking at the floodplain, the coastal VE zone, the flood elevations account for wave action. So that elevation already accounts for some waves. Everything landward of the VE, which is A, AE, X, those don't account for waves. So you can have an elevation, and then with storm surge and wave action, the water could actually be higher than that. We looked at the recorded USGS observed high water marks, which were also those elevations on the green map. And in general, overall, we looked at areas where there were trends in terms of where the city was the most vulnerable, because it's not equally vulnerable across town. If you're familiar with the layout of the city, the elevation of Highway 98 is lower on the west end of town, and as you travel east towards St. Joe, the elevation of 98 gets higher. So that means that the east side of town is already sitting higher than the west side of town, and that has an effect on how vulnerable those parts of town are to surge. Also areas where the canal, like the mouth of the canal and also 8th Street Canal, those are more vulnerable, areas near those, because the water doesn't have to go up and over Highway 98, it can just go up the canal and then outward. So.
Any questions on what we use to make our determinations? Okay. All right, so here's our recommendations for our new floodplain ordinance. We're gonna use the draft best available maps, and I'm gonna talk about that, to establish flood zones and flood elevations within the city. No matter what we do, whether or not you have to have flood insurance is based on the map, not based on what we do. We're not gonna change your requirement for having flood insurance. Okay, that's an important one. Don't forget that. The maps that we used are, it was, as Dina said, from the 2017 review they did. It takes sometimes 2 to 3 years, if not longer, before a map is preliminary. They won't even let us call these preliminary maps. We can only call them best available, because they still could change. So we wanted to make sure that we protected all of our property owners so that if the maps change or they go up a little bit, you're gonna be okay. Because if we say you're okay to build here, you start building there, and then the maps change a year down the road, you may be in trouble with your flood insurance premiums. So we considered that. So here's the recommendation. If you're in an A, AE, and a shaded X zone, and on the map, that's the green, the blue, and the tan. Your minimum finished floor shall be 1.5 feet above the X or the 500-year flood elevation. So let me just explain that a little bit. We talked about the finished floor. I think everybody understands how we're measuring that. The reason we said 1.5 feet, what we learned is when FEMA sets flood elevation, they round to the nearest whole number. So if it's, you need to be at 12 feet 5 inches, you're gonna be at 12. Well, you've lost 5 inches already. So we did the half foot to accommodate for rounding to the next whole number. And then we went up a foot, and we used the 500-year floodplain because we saw in this storm, and you can see from the surge map that's projected, that even in an X zone, you're gonna get water in a storm. So we didn't exclude that. We talked to our FEMA consultants as well as our disaster consultants. It is common in the Gulf Coast after a storm like this for agencies to freeboard. Basically, freeboard means go higher than the BFE. FEMA standard, they give you the minimum standard. That's the minimum. And so we've gone a foot above that, actually 1.5 feet depending on the rounding. It's very common now. I was just meeting with our FEMA expert before the meeting. And in Houston, Texas, Harris County, they had 3 500-year storms over a period of 5 years. The first time, they didn't freeboard in X. Second time, they didn't freeboard in X. The third time, they freeboarded in X. So we don't wanna learn it, we don't wanna have to be told multiple times this is the right thing to do, so this is what we're doing. So let me just give you some examples. We tried to plot just some different areas in the city to give you an idea of what your elevation would be. Now, if you're seaward of the CCCL, we have no control over that. That's gonna be between you and DEP. So we'll just give you some examples. Okay, so here's one, Texas Drive, 401 Texas. They're right there at that 8th Street Canal, a vulnerable area. We project that their elevation will be 3.5 feet above the ground. That's a stem wall. It's not piles. Hatley, lot of water in Hatley. If you've been down there, it actually moved homes off the foundation. Our freeboard requirement would put this house at 306 Hatley 4.5 feet above ground, or
Is that,
Yeah, existing.
is that house currently in an, what zone is that house going into?
That depends on, so we looked at the old map versus the new map. There are not a lot of areas in the city where you're changing zones and going from not in a flood zone to a flood zone or from an X to an A. That being said, this one area near the 8th Street Canal is one of the areas that we noticed the most change. So there are areas on Hatley that weren't previously in a flood zone and now they will be based on FEMA's upcoming maps.
But is it are you saying that 6.5 foot, you're quoting the 301 Hatley's gonna be 6.5 foot above, is that?
That's above ground.
it's above
That's
ground.
above ground, but what zone's it in?
It's in an AE.
Okay.
It's
That's
in a
not-
flood, yeah. It's in a flood.
So,
30, there's 301, there's 306. 306 is 4.5 feet. 301 is 6.5. 301 is in a flood zone, is in AE.
so let's take an X property.
Well, we're gonna give you an X, we'll go through it. Okay, so I use my house, I'm an X. I'm gonna have to elevate 3.5 feet
In the shaded X.
in a shaded X.
But this is saying 1.5 foot.
That's the freeboard, 1.5 feet. This is what I would have to do based on the 1.5 foot freeboard.
So the colors here are, like, the blue's not water, obviously.
The blue is the AE flood zone,
Okay.
100 year. The X
So-
is the 500-year.
So what's the 1.5 on top of, cause,
It's on top of the 500-year, the 0.2% flood elevation.
Yeah, can you?
cause if you're currently in an X, you gotta be 1 foot above the crown.
We just changed that.
What about 114 16th Street?
Well, I can't do it off the top of my head, we'd have to look at your elevation, but let me just give you some examples to kind of
14 foot
show
on the road.
people.
About 720 foot.
Can't tell you right now. A good person to ask would be your contractor, if you have a contractor. So, let's look at Gulf Foods. Now, it's hard to tell if Gulf Foods is in the CCCL or not by looking at this map, so let me just give that disclaimer up front. We don't know if they're in the CCCL, which we have no control over. But if they were not in the CCCL, they're looking at having to elevate 1/2 foot. Under this recommendation. Sharon's Cafe, again, depending on if they're inside, landward of the CCCL, 2.5 feet. Then we have, let's go over to the west end of town where we had so much damage. There's I think that's 44th, 109, 44. You would have to elevate 7.5 feet. Circle
Is that
Drive.
over, the 1.5 feet?
That would be the elevation with the 1.5 freeboard.
Including
That's the total.
Yes, that's
Above the
total.
ground.
Above the
That's
ground.
the total above ground.
Total.
What if you're in the black?
That's the,
Black
unshaded,
dots.
you're not in a flood zone, it doesn't affect you at all, and we're gonna talk about that. And then, let's see, the gas station on Pier Road, again, don't know if they're in the CCCL, but 3.5 feet above ground for their building. So
I
that
have
just
a
gives you an
question.
idea.
Can I-
Go ahead.
What happens if you're in an A zone?
Same thing. It's no
Well, but
different.
there is no base flood elevation in A.
A is the highest adjacent grade, so then we would freeboard at 1.5, right, above
But
that.
we have the 0.2%, so
Right,
we know that
that's
elevation,
right,
with the
that's
new
right,
maps, we know
that's
that.
Yeah, cause it's, we're going, Sally, we're using the
Only
0.2%,
for the 0.2%,
so we know the
not
elevation.
for the
Okay.
1%.
So anyways, that gives you some examples. If you'll go back, if we go back and look, let me just talk a little bit, about the other, development impacts, including fill to the 100-year floodplain shall be required to mitigate. We showed this example to the council, so I'm gonna show it to you here. You're in a floodplain, you come in and you fill. The water has to go somewhere, so you're gonna run it onto your neighbor and everywhere else. So we put in this requirement, that the development impacts, including fill to the 100-year floodplain, shall be required to mitigate. You bring it in one area, you gotta dig out another area to offset that.
Let me ask you a question
So
on that.
basically,
Is that gonna be retroactive?
I don't think so.
so that's basically
Just looking at
stormwater
the
for every
regular
property.
Drainage around here, when I built my house just a year ago, I came down here numerous times to you guys on Colorado Drive. There's no drainage. My neighbor is flooded every time it even thinks about drainage. And I didn't build up, really, I just rounded the lot out a little bit. I mean, unless you do something to get rid of this water, it doesn't, you're gonna have everybody built up here and the water has nowhere to go.
We absolutely understand that.
Okay, but, I mean, it has to be fixed.
That's why if you remember in our capital improvement plan there, you
Yeah,
have
and the
several million
sidewalk
dollars
moved
for
up
that.
over drainage and this and this.
And then there are no changes recommended within the VE zone. We're gonna go back and take a closer look at that, just to make sure. We're gonna look at the CCCL. Our intent was not to have any effect on the VE zone, because that's pretty much governed by, DEP, but we're gonna go back and take just a closer look at that and make sure before our meeting next week, to make sure we don't have an impact, or that we're not, we're not increasing their risk while we're lowering risk for someone else, so we're gonna take a look at that. The benefits,
Can I ask a question before you go on?
Yeah.
The second bullet there, am I correct in assuming that when you say above the X 0.2%, that means a 500-year
Yes.
flood? Okay.
We go over your house again one more time, Miss Tanya, do that math for us. How you got 3.5 feet from an X?
you wanna,
I can explain it. So on the new flood maps, surprisingly, we actually do have elevations. If you're in a shaded X, the new maps show the 0.2% that we're saying that we're gonna freeboard above. We didn't previously have that on the maps. So if you're gonna take a property, you're gonna first figure out which flood zone you're in, right? Cause this only will apply if you're in a shaded X, an A, or an AE. So that's the first step. Which zone are you in? Then you're going to look for that 0.2% and the elevation next to it. You're gonna add 1.5 feet to that elevation, and that's where your finished floor needs to be. So to figure out how high above the ground you are, you have to look then at your topography and where you know what elevation your property sits at, and the difference between that 1.5 on top of your flood zone and your ground is how high you're gonna have to go. So do you want me to run through like a specific one?
Just run through mine.
Okay,
It's the next
so
one.
Tanya's house, 408 7th Street. The flood zone there, I believe, is a 14, let's say. That's the 0.2% that you're looking for, so it's 14 next to it. So she has to add 1.5 feet to that from the map. So that puts her at 15.5. Her property, the elevation of her property is sitting at a 12. So from 12 to 15.5 is the 3.5 feet that she's actually gonna be off the ground.
And, you know, what's interesting is I'm surrounded by unnumbered A flood zones, and as you said, you're over in my neck of the woods, it's a problem.
Oh, yeah.
So that will help take care of some of that.
Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about what this means for you, the impacts to the owners. This is only affecting if you are new construction or you were over 50% substantially damaged. Doesn't change anything for you if you're just repairing. And it's gonna reduce your insurance premiums to individual property owners who are affected. If you're above the minimum, every foot you're above the minimum, that reduces your flood insurance. And it also is just gonna provide protection in more frequent, smaller storms, as we saw on the storm surge with the Cat 3. Okay, any questions on that slide?
Once you put all this out, and everything's confirmed, the people who weren't in a flood zone that are now in a flood zone, it's not gonna change at all.
We're not changing the flood zone, that's up to FEMA, we're not changing that at all. We're not changing, freeboard doesn't affect where you lie in the flood zone.
My house is a new house. It's 3 years old. I built it way above code. I got no water. The house, I'm the only person living on my block in my house. The houses across the street from me are in a flood zone because there's a canal in back of them, I was told.
And how high are you? You're about.
I came up, my floor is 3.5 foot above the street. Street's at 14.
And you're still standing?
Do what?
And you're still standing?
I'd have no damage. I had 2 inches of sewage in my house because the sewer line broke.
Okay.
Relative to flood insurance, will these numbers be enough to qualify or make the presentation to the insurance company what your actual home elevation is? Or do you have to have a survey to certify that?
I can't tell you how the NFIP does that.
I think you would still need an elevation certificate to prove if you're in an AE, you would need an elevation certificate to prove to the insurance company that you're above that 1% storm. If you're in an X zone, I don't think you're required to have insurance or an elevation certificate. So it depends on where you are.
Okay, thank you.
But if you were in an X zone and you wanted insurance, you probably would have a fit certificate to make sure your rate was properly.
It would help your rate.
I didn't have to.
Okay.
I got a new house and I got flood insurance and I'm in egg zone and they didn't require me to.
You're not required,
Right.
you're not required, but if you're above, we're freeboarding and you're higher than you need to be, that might be something that would benefit you on your premiums. Okay?
Ms. Tanya, did you say overlay that over there, like where Tommy T's and stuff is that gonna be in the CCCL or?
It's wherever CCCL is today. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head who's in
Okay.
CCCL.
Okay.
Okay, so the other thing, the benefits to our community as a whole is, it's gonna benefit us, we're applying for the community rating system now, and, once that's approved, then it lowers our, flood insurance premiums community-wide. So that's what we're going for. And requiring freeboard and other mitigation resiliency measures opens the city up for additional funding through FEMA for making sure we're more resilient for the next storm. So every penny that we spend in mitigation, our buildings, building them higher, stronger, helps us with getting funding to do that. So every dollar that we get from FEMA is a dollar your tax dollars won't have to pay for. So there's a big community benefit. And again, it just protects everyone citywide. Okay, any questions? As Nick said, this is just a proposal. I think we talked about that when we went through that. So the council will have a week, to think about it, if you wanna make any changes, and then we'll have that ordinance, the first reading.
That'll be
The
for next, for our
22nd.
next meeting.
We could do it as soon as next meeting. And we, of course, we'll have 2 readings like we always do, so. The second reading, I think, would not be until February.
Now, how do people get this information?
So Northwest Florida Water Management is going to have the new map posted on their website, and it will be interactive, so you can click on your parcel and pull up a report, and it'll give you the 1% and the 0.2% elevation. So we are gonna put that link on the website.
We'll definitely put it on the Facebook page as well, so you can link directly to it.
And then you said, Tanya, we'll also have the maps here.
Yeah, we're gonna put that one on the board out front,
Outside.
so people can come see it at any time they want.
You're saying it's working now?
I think it will be by tomorrow, is what we were told.
Oh, when?
Tomorrow.
Okay.
And this is it right here, though.
That's
Yes.
what it
This
will,
is it.
that's what it will look like.
That'll be preliminary maps.
Mhm. But you'll be able to go in there, it's interactive, so you can click on your actual parcel and pull up a report just for you.
And they should be looking for the 0.2.
They're looking for the
0.2.
0.2 elevation. Remember, you've gotta add 1.5 feet to what
Yeah.
you see out there.
And I'm assuming the building department can answer questions.
Okay, we good? Questions?
I just have a comment. I'd like to withdraw what I said earlier. Now that I understand what you've done, I don't think anybody on the planning and zoning board would have had a problem with it. Our problem yesterday was we didn't know what you were doing. We didn't know what freeboard was. We didn't know what this X times 0.02 was. And I think if you'd have just said 500-year floodplain, we'd have understood it.
Well, I said that multiple times last night. That's what we decided. We would just hold it until today, cause it was on the agenda today. So, okay.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to have our, we got a week, we're gonna bring this back next Tuesday for our first reading. And everybody understood, so I know that's the number one question. How does it affect me? So you understand how to get to it. Okay.
Barring any comments right now from the council, the ordinance is going to lay out these steps, these rules.
Well, I was fixing to say, are there council comments, concerns?
I don't have any.
Okay.
I
then
think
we're
they
up.
did a great job, laying it out and explaining it to us.
Then I say we move forward. Okay. All right, number 3. Fire assessment discussion. We said we were gonna do this, who's leading that, me, you? Everybody's looking at everybody.
You're good.
All right.
I didn't see a name after it, so,
Well, it came about from one of, Dennis came to us and talked about his situation. And if he's gonna stay where he is, meaning that zoning category, I mean, my position is, I think I don't even have to say anything. I didn't like it from the day we did it, and I still don't like it. I don't think it's fair. I think it's the most improper thing this city's ever done in the way it was presented, in terms of the money. Now, we don't have a fire department building. We don't have many parcels of property. I think we ought to look at doing something different. I said,
This year or next year?
right now.
I think it's too, I understand what you're saying. We still have a fire department, we just don't have a building. We still have a fire department. And I cannot even begin to make that decision at this point. I think there are other things that are being tossed around and thrown at us that we have to make decisions. You know, if we look at it down the road, absolutely, but I can't see looking at it right now, within this month. I just can't. I mean, you know, Dennis is hurting, and he's not the only one, as you said. You know, everybody who lost a house is being affected. So, you know, the monetary might be different, but it still affects their household. So, I just don't wanna make a snap decision right now because one person brought it up to our attention. Because it probably was in the back of their minds of a lot of people. So, I would like to continue discussing this and figuring out if we don't have the assessment, how are we gonna pay for our fire department? How are we gonna pay these people? How are things gonna get done? We need a fire department. The volunteer fireman department worked many, many years ago, and then it kind of lapsed. And then was it the ICO? ISO came and said, you better do something, otherwise your insurance will skyrocket. And I think that's why we started the ball rolling on doing something, so.
May I ask a question?
May I? Yes,
We're gonna keep it at the table right now. We'll get to you.
I think it's a good time to start looking at it. I understand the issues. I think there's a lot of stuff. We don't wanna jump in and make a quick decision that's wrong. We wanna try and do it, I think, right. We need to find out from our fire department what their budget would look like for the rest of the year, because they do have to be funded some way. And kinda looking in next year. Personally, the way we did it in the past, I didn't like. I was looking at doing a little different, but we were very late last year. And even what I was looking at doing last year, because we have so many buildings standing, wouldn't be appropriate now, because we don't have the buildings. The risk factor are in the buildings that you're building, that you don't burn a whole lot of land. You might burn the bushes, but you don't burn the land. I think it's appropriate to start now looking at this. For this year, yes, we need to know what we're going to need from the fire department to run it. We can't put it in this year's budget because this year's budget is already in place, so we're still gonna have to do something. We can't, I don't think, next year or the following years, use the method we did in the past. I think there's gotta be another way. For the next few years, we may have to look at it as a line item to the budget. We also have to understand that many of the things that went into the situation of building that assessment was the potential issues, and very heavily, I looked into it real hard, of what it would do to our homeowners insurance. Not only would it affect, of course, just that fire portion, but what I did find also is if we went to the very high numbers of 9 and 10, it decreases the number of companies that would actually come out and give insurance to people if you were 9 or sell them. Of course, when you have fewer in the market to sell you something, the prices go up for it all anyway. There's a lot to look at. It's appropriate at this part-time to start. The other thing that I know was involved with the assessment, it was the state. They required X number of people for a fire department. if you were gonna have a fire department, we didn't seem to be able to fill it on volunteers. But we've gotta look at all this, and I think it's right, Al, to start looking at it. I don't think we can make a decision this month, though. But I would wanna do it within the next 90 days.
I just don't know what else we could possibly look at that we hadn't looked at. But,
Well, I think Michael's been here, Michael's gone, and I think we have to look at it positively.
Rex, you have anything?
Yeah, I just don't know, you know, a solution, I don't know what a solution would be. We were gonna look at it in January,
Mhm.
and now we got a totally different situation. I like having a fire department. I've got a duplex, so I pay twice, and I'm willing to pay. I'm part of the community. People have houses, they can't, I mean, if we relied on them to, just them to fund it, we'd be in trouble, so. And there may be a better way. I don't know if right now we can figure that out.
Well, let me tell you, one of the things that this leads to, for me, is what is our essential personnel? Who do we need here? Who can we pay here? What can be done? What is fair to ask these people that don't have anything, whether it be a home or a business? We can't ask people or act like it's normal when it's not normal. And remember, this money was raised from October of 18 through October of 19. And one of the things that bothers me most is, and I guess it's just so eye-opening now when there are so many that don't have anything, the discrepancy in what you're asking people to pay is like a red flashing light. Whether it be $387 or whether it be $3,887, we all don't have anything.
Well, the other thing I'd like to.
So I think that has to be, and that's the part of those that have talked to me, is if we were paying equal, that would be one thing. But we're not. And everybody thought, I know they went through all of the state regulations, we paid somebody to come down here and tell us how to do it. But there were many, many people that came to those hearings and said, please, be cognizant of what you're asking these mom and pop owners to do. And now that we're at 50 cents a square foot and don't have anything, it's a lot different than $387 and $3,870.
You're right, but if the ones that are at the 300 are the ones that have to pay the budget, and the budget is way high, the 300 is gonna have to go up. I think we should also go back to the state and say, we are, you know, the residences shouldn't have to bear it all, you're right, but I think we have to go back to the state and say, okay, you said we had to have this many fire people, we had to have yada yada to meet the state situations. We're not normal. We've just had a major hurricane. Can some of those things be deleted so we can also include it in? I think we've got to look at a lot of things. I don't want to get to a point, we need to do something, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that. I think we've got to look at it and see what we can do that's proper for everyone, see if we can get the state involved and come back and lower the regulations so that we can do it properly and have a fire department. Because we're gonna build.
What about essential personnel? Don't you think, I would like to ask staff to look at that. As we move forward through the year, what are we gonna do? What is appropriate? And I think that's our job. I think it's it's on us to say, what can we do as a government to lessen the burden on the citizens?
And we have to look just like FEMA, what's being forced for us to do, and how can we go back to the state and say, hey, we can't do that.
Well, I just believe in taking care of ourselves. We can go get many government agencies, but I think that in-house, for who works here, what can we afford? That's a separate issue from the fire assessment. I think that's an overall, as we move forward, I think it's for me, it's a very necessary question to start asking.
Part of the
Who do we think?
portability we have to look at also is if we don't do it and our insurances go up, what we don't pay to the fire or the city for assessment, it's gonna go up in
The next year,
insurance.
Bill, there's a lot of people not worried about that.
I know, I'm just saying, no,
A lot of
I'm just
people not
saying,
worried
I
about
think this, I think we do need to look at a lot more of this. I think we gotta.
All right, so let's get back to the question that started the whole thing. Mr. Foley has property that is destroyed. It's a residential property. For 10 days, he was being charged 50 cents a square foot for 10 days, and now it's a residential property. I don't think that anyone else in the city will come to us with that particular question. He asked for some relief, if y'all recall, in his letter and in his presentation. And I think while it says fire assessment discussion, ultimately, the reason this is on here is because of his request. So, I think we have had ample time to think about what that situation lies, or what he is dealing with, so, Dennis, you have any, I mean, you've already said in your letter, and do you have a,
Well,
I don't wanna speak for you.
Thank you. Just one further point. I had a house on 104 15th Street that now resides on 110 15th Street. My letter didn't challenge that. I've got a unique situation over there. Dennis Foley did not make that a residential property. The city of Mexico Beach did back in 1988, unbeknownst to me. So that is a unique example, and I hope and pray for your consideration.
What was located on the property prior to this one?
Storage. Well, I'm not gonna make a decision today because it was brought up and last week and that was it. And now we have a discussion now and we're supposed to make a decision today. I won't do that. I have to, there are lots of other people. And I agree, we need to look at this, absolutely. And the arrangement was that we would look at it this year, and if we did wanna do the assessment or change the assessment, then we change it. I like Bill's idea of getting some documentation. And Al, I agree with you. You know, what personnel do we need? And if we wanna contact the state, if we wanna keep a good ISO rating, what are we required to do with our number of homes that we have currently? You know, see what they can work with us, just to get some, and if we don't wanna follow their rules, then that's up to us, but at least get the information to us so we can make an educated decision.
ISO is based on one structure, 5,000 structures, it doesn't change by
Okay.
number.
Okay.
But state that requires the number of full-time fire people requires the certain level of fire is state, it's not ISO.
State statute that 4 certified firefighters attend every fire call in the state.
That's correct. That was also made assuming Michael wasn't here. My request is we go back and say Michael is here. We've gone from this.
I can't.
You know, what can we do? We maybe said no, but maybe they also need to change.
Mayor, if I could, can I just
Yeah,
make a comment
please,
about,
just-
when you talk about essential, employees, just understand that the fire department is funded from the fire assessment. Changing employees in another area isn't gonna change the fire department budget and the fire department assessment. What's gonna change that is what you wanna do. If you want to, lower that ISO rating, then you'll be outside those required standards. But the fire department, we reached out early on after the storm, and we were told that, as Adrian just said, it doesn't matter the number of structures, it's the area that you're protecting, and that's not gonna change. We've lost 2 employees since the storm, and we have not backfilled those employees. And you have to understand, we're doing more work now than we've ever done before. And we're down 2 employees, but we're still managing as we're losing employees. We're trying to just let attrition take care of that, but we're down 2 since the storm, and we're still going.
And I may have misunderstood, Al, since we were talking about the fire assessment, and you talked about personnel, I assumed you were talking about the fire department. If you were talking about other departments, I think that's a different discussion that
Well,
should
the fire
take place.
department is, it's 24/7 service.
Right.
We had 2,700 homes, we have 500, we still got 24/7 service.
I agree with you.
Uh,
I agree with
to
you.
me, that's, if we don't look at that for what we're gonna expect people to pay and what we're gonna actually collect.
I think we do need to look at that, absolutely. I mean, in my mind, and then yet, why do we need 4 firefighters, or 12 we have now for the whole program? Why do we need that for 500 homes? To me, that we don't need it. And I agree, we do need to look at it.
Well, there's several things to look at. One, we have an ordinance, and we passed the ordinance, and it says, if people don't pay, and I don't know, I think a lot of our out-of-town people will pay. But I don't have a problem with the other discussion. I was trying to deal with, I don't have a problem with even looking at it down further in that, gathering whatever data we think we need to gather.
I'll ask one other question.
It's, Mr. Foley sent us a letter, it's been 3 weeks. I can't imagine that we haven't, surely we've all read the letter, we have some opinion about whether or not we're gonna grant him, call it what you will, a variance, relief. That's what he asked for in this letter, clear and simple. So, for right now, if we can, I wanna get that out of the way. Is there a discussion about his particular situation? We told him we were gonna meet, we were gonna talk about it, we didn't do it last week, so now we're here this week. And I think we either need to tell the man what we're gonna do.
Let me ask you a question, maybe you can answer that.
All right.
Truly a question, not trying to be. If we gave he or anyone else saying, I'm gonna drop it to 0 or whatever, since it's been billed through the county tax department, do we have a way to do that, to relieve that individual, since it's already been billed from the tax department? That's the only thing I'm curious, do we have that ability?
Sure. If he doesn't, it's a tax assessment, so it's separate from the
But it's on that
ad
bill.
valorem tax. It's on the bill, but it's up to us to enforce it and collect.
So if we relieve him of it, are we ready to relieve everybody else who lost a house?
Yep. I'm dealing with the guy that wrote us the letter, I'm not trying to deal with
Right, I mean,
the whole community.
I agree with you, but if you make one exception, when 1,000 homes have been lost, are we ready?
Do you know of another situation that has what he's described?
It doesn't matter. His situation, he's an individual person. I've lost a house, can I come to you and say I don't wanna pay?
I didn't challenge that.
No, I know,
aspect of it.
but, what I'm assuming, you wanted a relief that you don't want, you wanna take it off of.
On that specific property.
Exactly.
I lost a house on 15th Street. I didn't challenge that.
I think what she's saying though is not whether you would, but Rex, I think it's your daughter that owns the house you live in. If, I'm not one way there, I'm just trying to, again, clarify. I think that what she's saying is, whether it's you, or if Rex came in and asked for relief because that whole house was totally gone and the city gave that, then for all others that lost the house, that opens it up. And I think this situation she's asking, if we ask one person or give one person relief, aren't we opening it up to all the others that the total houses went or half of them went?
And that
That's the
money-
only thing I think. It's not a challenge of what your situation is or not. It's, for the city, how far is it gonna be opening it up for everything?
And to change the assessment or not have an assessment next year, I think that we need to talk about that. But in the meantime, how are we gonna pay if we start right away saying for these next 9 months or 6 months until October? How are we gonna pay for what we already have? We're already,
If they're not in the budget.
You don't
I mean,
think
the
he's
money
not
that we
asking that question himself? How is he gonna pay that when he doesn't have anything over there?
How many other people are asking the same thing? though?
This was a
You know,
business.
I don't think it's fair because I lost everything and I just paid $10,000 on my fire assessment. You know, if everybody gets their money back, how's the city gonna stay afloat?
But in my case, I can't.
In my case, I lost everything I
Peggy,
have.
Peggy,
I did as well.
I don't know that we're understanding.
But I can't
Then
re-
let's charge him for what he's
But I,
done.
but I can't rebuild.
I guess the $1 million question is whether or not by law can we exempt one person or make an adjustment for one person. I don't know the answer to that, so we'll have to
And keep in mind, there
research
were
that.
3 different amounts. It was commercial 50 cents, residential structure 356, and residential vacant 54.
My personal feeling right now, we need to table it at least one more week and get information in, because I didn't expect I looked here, it's fire assessment, I was expecting the whole thing to start that. I didn't expect the question for you, I knew you wrote the letter, but I think it needs to be tabled for at least one more week.
I'll understand that. Could I close with, and I'll make this my last question. Looking forward into 2019, vacant lots that were once owned, if they remain vacant lots, will the assessment automatically revert to a vacant lot status? Or do we have to?
I think that's a question we have to answer as we look at what to do the fire department for the whole year next year.
Okay.
Yeah, that
Don't
brings
think
us
it's-
a whole nother.
Yeah.
and I think that's what we need to look at. How are we going to get assessment, how are we gonna get money to fund our fire
Which
department,
methodology?
whatever size it will end up being.
How could it be anything but a vacant lot?
Yeah.
Well, I agree, I'm not saying that,
I know, but I mean, I just,
yeah, I mean, if your house is gone, it's a vacant lot, and
All
you're
right,
not rebuilding, it's a vacant lot.
is
in my
there,
mind.
are there any other comments?
I'd like to just comment on that.
Okay.
I back the mayor on this, we gotta get the bull by the horns. It's really put an undue stress on the commercial property owners since it went in. And I just paid my tax bill in December on my building, and I realized something, the fire tax, and I'll go back and double check, but it was more, I paid more for that than I paid for the millage to Mexico Beach. And not saying we don't need a fire assessment, but it needs to be more equal. And it needs to be done sooner than later.
Well, maybe next time we may have to go and put it just all into the assessment, and it's just another line item in the tax that's paid, not a separate line item.
Or if we gotta raise our millage 2 mills and it's equal to everybody, then,
That's the question that I think has to be answered.
But it needs,
When you say equal to everybody, I mean, you mean I would pay the same as?
no, I mean, if you set it at a millage, then it's just spread across all the properties and we're just charging a mill. We're not saying the commercial property down here is paying 5,000 and the guy down there is paying 300, whether he's got a 5-story house or a shanty or whatever he may have. Or vacant lots, $54 or whatever y'all said, but I think he brought it up, it's something that's, we say we're gonna address it, but that bill is still ticking, Right now, it's ticking away.
Well, and we can not like things, I know we say we don't like it, but somebody's gotta have a plan. And he's got a plan.
Well, no, but I got a comment. I mean, I'm new here in the neighborhood, Rock Creek, 422 Colorado. I've only been here less than a year. But I looked at all your assessment stuff that was going on online when you talk about the fire departments and everything else. And you pretty much have addressed it right now. before you can even do anything, you need to go to the state first and see what they can say. After Michael, you were addressing that. What, do we need this, do we need that? And the fire department, I was military Coast Guard for 40-something years. If you're manning something 24/7, you have to have them people. So it doesn't matter if you have 10 houses or 1,000 houses. You're gonna have, if the state says 4 people, and you're manning 24/7, you're gonna have the man-hours out there. And I agree with what you're saying about looking at the millage rate, because that spreads it around, because right now you got a lot less houses, you're gonna have a whole bunch more empty lots. Some of these houses that got wiped out, it might be 2 years before they can be rebuilt. So everything's gonna change. So you're gonna have to look, like you said, go to the fire department. What is the staffing, manning requirements from the state, from the fire department, and then go from there, figure out what it's gonna cost for the year, and then look at maybe a millage rate, because that'll spread it to everybody.
And just continue on, we will have a lot of people griping when we do that.
Well, I know
because
that, but you can't, you gotta have
they'll
this
have
facility.
vacant lots, and you're gonna be paying more than the $54 for the fire department.
24/7 is 24/7.
Oh, I know.
That's the
All
bottom.
right,
There's no easy answer.
we're going to, move on, because I don't think there's any decision will come from this.
Mayor, can I just make
Yes.
sure I understand what you guys need to do? We're gonna check and see if you can make an exemption for an individual owner, we'll research that. And going forward, I mean, the mayor and I have talked about this, quite a bit on the assessment. I think there's a better, fairer way to do the assessment this upcoming year. We need to get working on that, because the decisions, we need those decisions made by the May timeframe. Another option, back to your comments, Mayor, on looking at essential employees, if you eliminate your fire assessment, you put it back into your millage, then you can move money between funds, and when you have a situation like this, you can accommodate it instead of tying your budget to that assessment. So just some things to be thinking about.
I think that from the city also, one other thing, it may need to come from Nick. If we start exempting, how much is it going to really affect us, I mean, in this current thing? Is one exemption going to bring in a host load of other requests?
And you approved a budget based on revenue, there was no surplus, so everything you're exempting, you have to make up somewhere, or you have to cut something.
And keep in mind, we lost the fire station, and we lost a lot of equipment in the storm, and the insurance isn't covering all of that, so just keep that in mind. And then my final comment is, Philip knows this, our disaster consultants will tell you, we are at risk more than ever with a fire because of all the dead and fallen vegetation and debris around the city, so now's probably not the time to think about cutting back on your fire department.
I'm reviewing all of our governing documents now. I don't have an answer yet, but I haven't done anything so far in terms of a process or prohibition or allowance of doing this kind of decision. But I'm looking.
Can you find out within this next week from the state?
It's a statute, it's a statutory
Okay.
law.
But again, from an emergency, are they making any?
That's what I don't know. I just know.
That's what we're
So
asking.
could we find out if there's any exemptions due to the emergency situation we're in?
Certainly do that.
It's on my list.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we're gonna move on. Number 4 is me, transfer of ownership, CDC property. I was approached, by the director of the CDC about us transferring ownership of that property to them. I think it's an excellent idea. And I told here is what I know, that I asked that first we identify that it is truly the Mexico Beach Community Development Council. It cannot be under any ownership of the county and or the Panama City Beach TDC, and that there must be a reverter clause in the chance that, I don't know, CDC says, look, we're not a CDC anymore, whatever, doesn't matter. They can't sell it, it reverts back to us, and, I think it's time that we get out of the landlord business, personally. I don't see, and, they're not asking for any insurance money. So whatever we got for that building, we can put that in our coffers, and, for a better use than building them something that I think
Who would build that building back?
whoever they get.
That would be their responsibility.
Transfer the ownership by deed, and like I say, with the reverter clause. For a token, most of it, Nick will know it's either $1 or $10 or for some consideration.
Right.
But those folks, they run a good ship, they're gonna put down there, I mean, I think their track record is solid, and, I would like to suggest that we do that. Once the contract comes back, we certainly, this is just okaying them to draw up the documents, let us look at them, ensure that we're satisfied that everything that we need to make sure that it isn't sold or transferred to some other entity. If y'all are good with that, is there any objection to at least letting them draw it up there, let them do all the work, attorney-wise?
They've been talking about this for a while, so.
I'm curious, what kind of money, what was that building, sure?
It was very little, what, 167?
It wasn't much, I know, but it
150,
did have some coverage, yeah.
And we're getting,
All right, well, I'm just gonna tell them to move forward, let them give us something back to review, and we'll see what happens.
Just a quick comment. It's not difficult to put together the public purpose for why you do it. You can avoid rebuilding all that. We do have a charter requirement though for selling property by ordinance, so it's something that would take a few steps. It wouldn't just be overnight.
Oh, I know, I understand that, and I'm not trying to think that we would just look at it and say, okay, good, and no, I understand.
I know, just for the crowd, we wanted to make the clarification.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna, and you have Miss Lane?
I do.
Let you go first.
Just a few things. You have a letter in your packet. The county's asking us to join Panama City Beach and send out, a letter to our elected officials regarding price gouging on gasoline, the difference in price and just between like Okaloosa and Bay County. They seem to have taken advantage of, our misfortune. So if you guys are, just wanna see if you're comfortable with us sending the letter.
I've seen that, and I think we should, I mean, I'm good, for me.
Good.
Okay. The next one is the, task order. You'll see in your packet a task order from Dewberry. You can skip all of the FEMA required language and just kind of go to the meat of the task order, which is the design work. And on page 1 has the list of activities to do the design and engineering for repairing Canal Parkway. We have to get that open. We've got to move it forward. I know this was not in your packet, but Dewberry just completed it yesterday, and I wanted to get it before you because we need to get this work done so we can get that put out for bid. And this includes Dewberry handling all of that for us.
And we've talked about this right at the beginning, and this is for the permanent road, not the temporary.
Correct. This is gonna be
Okay.
permanent. We're going straight to the permanent fix. And again, this is reimbursable under FEMA. This is our damage, but we just need, a vote and approval. If you guys are willing to do that today, to let them move forward with that design.
Okay with me?
Chair will entertain a motion, or discussion.
I make a motion that we, agree that, they start doing the task force for, Salt Creek Crossing and send it out for bids.
You say the amount, $36,100.
$36,100.
Second. Motion second, discussion. Any comments? Any opposition? Let the record reflect 4-0.
And then the last thing I had is, last meeting, we talked about the competitive bid ordinance and increasing that from 8 to 20. We didn't, are you guys ready for us to bring you that first reading next week to do that? That just helps us move quicker, and 20 is pretty much a standard. The 8,000 cap is several years old.
And that is for this year only. For the
Well,
one-
that changes the competitive bid ordinance, but remember, anything over 3,000, we still put it before the council anyways,
Okay.
if it's unbudgeted.
A believe that increase to 20 though was, I think we set it up for 1 year.
For
We do it for 1 year.
Yeah, that's what
It was a-
I
it
thought.
was
We
a
can look at it
temporary-
again.
I thought it was, yeah.
Thank you.
Comment? Refresh my memory. I mean, I know it, but how does it work again?
This is the competitive bid ordinance, so, you guys, we would bring you, if it's less than $20,000, we can, just bring you quotes and without having to put it out for bid to move it quicker. We initially started this because of the insurance proceeds, being able to start replacing vehicles, instead of having to put everything out for bid. You know, a lot of that will be purchasing through state contracts anyways, which is an option that we have. But it just, it prevents us from having to put every little thing that's $8,000 or more out for a competitive bid and wasting time, when the majority of this is coming from either insurance money, FEMA reimbursement. And we can change that. We did check with our disaster consultants. There's nothing improper with what we're doing, bringing that, guideline up to 20,000 for procurement.
I think last week we talked about having it temporary for a year and only related to absolute Hurricane Michael, concerns, problems.
Pretty
Which
much
is
all we're
everything.
doing. Yeah.
Okay? Chair will entertain a motion.
Make motion.
Motion to do first read next meeting.
Okay. Say what we motioned?
Okay, first
Do
reading.
first reading.
Need a second on that?
So we're gonna have, or we, I really don't need, if we're gonna, all we need is a consensus to move forward. We don't need,
Okay.
I'm sorry, I've been here too long. So, is there any opposition to bringing the first reading for next week? Okay. That's all we need on that.
Right, one other thing, we did get approval from FEMA yesterday to start private property demolition. It's gonna be a rather lengthy process, it's not quick and easy like, the right of entry. They have to come out and inspect every site, before we can demo it. So we will be getting some information out there this week, and we'll start collecting names, property owners' names, if you want us to do that demolition. Same rules apply about your insurance, you can't take insurance money for that. We'll get the information out there, but just know if you want us to do that and you sign up, it could be weeks and weeks before we can come out there and demo it. So just wanna set some expectations, because they do have to come out and do, we have to provide them the list, and then they have to come out and do, site inspections before we can demo.
I just have a question on what has been the response of people coming and saying, you can clear off my land?
We have about 130
Oh, really?
who've
Good.
applied for the right of entry to
Oh,
clear
good.
the debris.
Good.
And some folks are having Team Rubicon do it because
Yeah.
they're a little bit quicker than the FEMA process.
Okay.
But those are your options.
Can I ask you a question on the, because I sent in a bunch of letters to people across the street from us. Online with all the Facebook stuff, it's back and forth, debris, trees. What are they actually taking off of these empty lots? Will they take the trees that are busted, the ones that fell down, any debris, metal,
I can
junk
answer
laying
that.
there?
Go ahead.
On these vacant lots and or improved lots, they will take any loose debris that is on the ground, they will take any tree out that poses a risk to the health and safety of anybody or anything, whether it be a structure, a person, an animal, what have you. The only thing they will not move or take out will be a tree that doesn't meet the requirements and or the house / shed, barn, whatever you got.
Okay, so
No demo
fallen,
work.
bent over trees, collapsed,
cut those,
garbage
yes.
laying there and all that, they'll clean up.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that answers 400 questions on Facebook.
So the demo, as Philip said, right of entry is one process that he just described, demo is a different one. Demo, we can come in and demo.
Now, I mean, I sent all the
demolish.
people across the street from the 4 lots, whether they got back to you or not, I don't have a clue, but I mean, we sent them out.
Question?
Yeah.
Dennis Foley again. House on 104 ended up on 110. Is that their responsibility?
Michael left it on their lot, that's their responsibility, but if you could let them know, we're doing the right of entry.
I'm
Get
sure
in
they
there
don't
and
have
help them
insurance
with
on
that.
it.
We can get in there and help them with that.
I think they might be in the Crowbar Hotel, but who knows?
I have a question.
I would recommend everybody, whether you have insurance or not, I recommend everybody to fill out the ROE, get it to us, let us look at it, you know, because if you don't turn it out, maybe you're gonna miss out on something. There's a possibility you're gonna miss out on a great program. So I encourage everybody, not just for loose debris, but for demos too, bring it to me, bring it to us. You know, we can really get this thing moving. We're just basically waiting on paperwork.
Can the city somehow send all these property owners something?
We have been contacting property owners, since we got approved. It's an extremely long process. Nothing gets the word out there like word of mouth.
I figured that's
You know, so I beg everybody to tell everybody no, fill out an ROE, fill out a demo permit, let us get moving.
But to answer your question, we are being proactive with that. Our code enforcement officer, she's out there when we see demolition or debris on a property. We're collecting that address. Public Works is contacting that owner and offering that service. So we are doing that proactively.
Okay, great, appreciate that.
If I may, I'm
Yeah.
John Cole, 112 40th Street. We got slabs out there on the property now since Rubicon came out there. And particularly when we're dealing with pervious, impervious, and so on, what's the responsibility on taking out slabs? Is FEMA do that, or what's the story?
It's up to the owner, and it depends on your insurance and what you're getting reimbursed for. The city can remove that under the demolition
If we have no
process.
insurance on the property.
Then you wanna sign up for the demolition and let us come in there and get it for you.
Okay.
I just have a quick question on, like debris that's in, we have a little ditch, it's not even a canal, but I know eventually that we're planning on getting to. So the debris that blew into all the trees and stuff in there, that will get picked up then, or?
It will eventually be picked up. I will tell you that FEMA doesn't reimburse for us for collecting debris that's in an unimproved property, but we're working on that with FEMA. They're actually gonna be out here tomorrow, and we are working on that. To try to get, we have, our situation's unique. Most of the debris is in wetlands, and areas, so we're trying to get some exemption from that rule so we can clean it up. But at the end of the day, we have to clean it up, right? We can't leave it, so.
Okay, moving on. Go ahead.
That's it. That's all.
Dana, you have anything?
No.
No. Adrian? No, Phil? Go, you're up.
Update?
Whatever
Okay.
you're up. I don't wanna leave you out.
One of the biggest things, update on is, as of, at 3 o'clock, we'll get the official word, but we will be able to let the board water notice from 25th Street to Canal Parkway, so we'll get done with that. Got about a page and a half of notes, I'm not gonna bore y'all with that. But if anybody's got any questions for me, I'll be happy to answer them.
So is there water down on Miramar in that area,
Yep.
Philip?
Yes, ma'am. There's water everywhere but 37th Street.
Thank you.
The reason there's no water on 37th Street is the meters and everything were up at the houses, and it's gonna take some time for us to get all that fixed.
So if we want it back on, we need to come into the city individually and request our water to be turned back on, correct?
It's probably not gonna be as easy as just gonna turn your water on, but, more than likely you're gonna need a meter. There's a lot of meters that are going.
Yeah.
But that's something that we've gotta discuss. I've heard a couple different things on the south side over there because wastewater isn't currently online, about not turning on the water on the south side right now. Just because there is that chance that somebody could possibly try to hook up to the wastewater system, and next thing you know, we've got a sure enough stinky issue.
Yeah, if you need your service turned back on, please call. Our phones are back up and working at City Hall. We're excited about that. Most of our technology has been restored, so thank you for your patience. We had a gentleman in here one day very upset with us because our landlines weren't working, and he wanted to call back. We asked him where to call back. Should we call you back on your home phone? Well, of course not. Landlines aren't working. Well, there you go. So, but they're back up and working now, so we're good.
I do have one thing on that.
Original City Hall numbers.
Yep, the original numbers.
Mr. Chance.
The online web billing system. for the first time since the storm went live last Friday. If you get email bills, you probably got bombarded with a past due notice last Friday. That is because if you were an auto draft, nothing's been paid since the storm. I couldn't do the auto draft with the network down. On the 31st of January, I will be pulling all of the auto bills all the way back to October. So that's going to happen on January 31st if you're on the auto billing online. And if you want to pay it ahead of time, you can log in today and pay it. It works.
And important to note is
Yes, it does.
no late fees. We are not charging any late fees until the February billing that will come out next month. So don't worry about it. You don't have to call us. You're not gonna be billed. We're not gonna turn you off.
And water bills are being mailed either today or tomorrow. They're gonna say due January 20th. Today's the 15th. Everybody's gonna call and yell at me that they only have 4 days, or they got their bill on the day it's due. Ignore your due date. We're not doing past due penalties, as Tanny said. It's been a little crazy. Takes a little time to get some bills out with our technology issues we've had. It's just taking longer, so ignore your due date, pay when you can.
So the homes that were destroyed, like on the, south side of 98 and stuff, will we get just a base bill, or will we get anything right now?
Depends if you've shut off your service with City Hall or not. If you have done nothing and not contacted us, yes. If you've told us, there should be no bill.
Okay.
You good?
I still got a little bit more.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
For someone who did.
I didn't answer.
Just, update real quick on where we are with cleaning the sewer system. The sewer line behind where Killer Seafood used to be, along those shotgun homes, on that small stretch of Oleander, all the way to 14th Street lift station. So that includes, Killer Seafood, those homes behind that, 12th Street, 13th Street, and 14th Street. Those lines have been cleaned. We've told the people that they can use the wastewater over there now. On the south side, we've cleaned from 36th Street to Miramar Drive up to this point. We know we had issues with the lift stations. We know we had issues with the manholes, but so far, the pipe itself, the mains itself are looking pretty good. So we're I don't wanna say lucking out on that, but we're lucking out on that. So that's moving very well. We're finding a lot of debris, obviously, inside of the manholes, which is causing an issue and slowing things down. But the process is moving and it's still going forward. And they're doing a really good job too. And that's all I've got.
And we've also on that one finished smoke testing for all the areas where the sewer where it's dry enough that we can do it, and then as the cleaning inspection moves out, we'll be able to use the bypass pump and take it down and finish smoke testing on that end of town to the west side.
Now do you have any?
Over the last 5 days, we've had 9 more vehicles located. So if anybody's missing a red Nissan Frontier, a Chevy Tahoe, white Ford F-150, a white Titan XD, a silver Ford Fusion, a white Kia Optima, a red VW Thing, I think that is Jack Mullins. I sent him that right. And a Pontiac pontoon boat was all resurfaced, and they're over at the boat ramp now. So if you know anybody looking for those particular vehicles, we haven't made contact. The other 20 vehicles we have identified, and the insurance companies, because I'm still getting calls for insurance wanting reports of stolen vehicles. As we all know, they're not stolen.
Those were all taken out of the canal.
Yes, ma'am.
And just to follow up on that, we need to get off St. Joe's property. That agreement was for 60 days. There's a time frame for when we're required to hold those boats and cars, and we have exceeded that. So if you're still looking for it, you need to call the police department, because as we pull them out now, we're hauling them off. They're no longer gonna be stored at the St. Joe property. So if you need your vehicle specifically, let the police department know. Otherwise, as we pull them, they're going.
So St. Joe says,
The agreement was just for 60 days. We've exceeded that, so.
They had
it's
said
time.
anything.
okay,
I
they
mean,
haven't
but
said
let's
anything.
don't-
We're following the
Yeah,
rules.
But there, let's-
Yeah,
it's
okay.
time. We're trying to keep
Okay.
our agreement with
Okay,
them to get them out.
okay.
Yeah.
And I do have photographs of everything that's been recovered, located, or moved in whatever condition it was found. Most of them are pretty appalling. So if you think you've got a particular vehicle missing, can't find a VIN number, that means we have to call. But if you got a vehicle, I do have photographs of all 4 angles on every vehicle.
that on your Facebook, Chief?
I can put them on there.
April, Nick, you got,
No,
Oh,
we're
no,
good,
sorry.
we're gonna, just look, we will be posting the map from the Northwest Florida Water Management District, we'll be posting that link there, and responding to lots of questions.
Nick?
Just a quick follow-up, I did locate the rules that's gonna govern that fire assessment, possibility of changing that particular assessment. The standard we're gonna be governed by is if the council is satisfied that any such assessment is so irregular or defective that the same cannot be enforced or collected, the council may take all necessary steps to impose a new assessment, meaning change it to different assessments. So if you wanna take that up next meeting, I'm comfortable that you can. Right, for the individual circumstances.
Do we wanna take that up next meeting?
It did sound like that was it was tied into that same conversation about the zoning had been changed without realizing it, and it is, I don't know, I have all that information, but that's a little different than just your standard property's been demolished.
Do we wanna take it up next meeting? Put it on the agenda. Alright, go ahead, Rex, you good? Glenda, comment?
I just wanna thank, let's start out with Tanya and Adrian and Philip and Chief Walker and Chief Kelly and Dina. I think they have done a marvelous job for 14 weeks being hit. 14 weeks ago, we were hit with Michael. I think we are in great shape for having this happen to us 14 weeks ago. So kudos to all of you for working so hard.
Bill, you got anything? I got two things quickly on, I've been asked multiple times on the canal, the property owners on the private side of the canal, when we're cleaning the canal, will they get that debris how does that work?
On the docks and stuff? Yes.
They will?
Mhm. Yeah, we can get any debris that could possibly get back into the canal. Whether it be blown into the canal, kicked into the canal, or just fall into the canal, we can collect
Okay.
that, yes, sir.
So, Philip, will they take the deck, the viewing deck that's in one of our,
If it poses a risk to navigation, to the safety, to the health, then yes,
well,
we
it's
can
sitting
take
in
it.
like one of our owners' boat lift in the back of
Well, then I would say
Blue.
yes now. No.
Okay.
But now it's important to note that if you're one of the property owners on the private side of the canal or anywhere else along the canal, you still need to come in and do an ROE.
Okay.
Okay, you still need to come in and do that. So
Okay.
whomever this may be, tell
Uh-huh.
them that if they haven't done one, they need to come in and do it.
Okay,
That way, there's no question that we were able to get everything we were able to get,
okay.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Last thing I have, I wanna raise the question about campers. Our ordinance that we passed allows for temporary campers by property owners on their lot. And we did that, is it a year? A year. I've had several ask me about putting a camper on a lot, but the property owner isn't the one staying in it. And I'm trying to figure out in my mind if that's why we wouldn't, if it's one camper per lot and the property owner allows for a camper to be there, but maybe their neighbor's staying there, or was that the understanding that y'all had, that we were strictly, I mean, I know it was, that was in the language, it was only the property owner?
One camper,
one-
not two, not
That's right,
three,
not two,
four, just
one, yeah, one camper, one lot.
It was more flexible than that.
Yeah, you could, if your lot
You
couldn't
could
house
move.
it, you could do it on an adjacent
Mhm.
lot with that property
With
owner.
council.
Yes.
With permission.
But you couldn't put one on it and rent.
Right.
Correct, and you
I'm
could.
not talking about rent, I'm just talking about if you have someone that can't get their house is destroyed or in a way that you can't get a camper, but across the street, you could
Okay.
I guess the reason I'm looking at that, if we were to allow that, I mean, that's another water customer, that's another sewer customer. That's another person that might buy a pizza or either buy a hamburger or, I'm trying to figure out what would be, if it's the property owner that is responsible for the camper in terms of, I mean, get the water and why would it bother us that we couldn't accommodate those, I mean, there's no house.
We're talking about residents that may have to be across the street.
What I'm talking about.
Or you're talking
camper
construction
one-
crews.
Yeah, construction workers bringing
Like
an RV, loading it up.
That's not an RV, we're talking about a camper, right? What?
Even a
What
camper, I don't mind. I think it needs to be someone that's, I'll put it this,
So nobody's.
I grew up in construction. I know a lot of construction people, and as a homeowner, I don't want people around me for the next 2 months or whatever, because they're getting a better price on their house if their contractor can come in and put an RV there. I'm worried a little bit about the safety of my property and what's in my house, regardless of whether we're getting hookup fees or water fees.
What difference does that make if it's an RV or if it's a condo down at the Palms where all the construction people are staying? They're staying right next door, and I'm having issues there with those construction.
Okay, then the same thing is, as far as that goes, is why can't I have a tourist come in and put their camper on my lot? Because that's what Palms and these are too. These are places that people typically are talking, if they wanna rent a property.
But we're
That's
talking
different.
temporary, we're not talking long-term, and we're talking about people that need, I mean, do you realize how many people are leaving town because they don't, there's no house? And a guy that's trying to
Are we talking
fix.
about property owners or different?
It doesn't matter, if it's one, if it's the property owner.
It does matter.
Well, it doesn't matter to me, sir, okay? Okay, it doesn't matter to me. If the property owner wants to take that responsibility and put somebody there, whether they charge him or don't charge him, but I'm just trying to figure out who, if there were a house there, we wouldn't be concerned about it. We wouldn't be concerned who's staying there.
Mr. Al, are you talking about like, I'll take for instance Todd's brother's place on Florida, right there at the end
I'm
of
talking
Carolina.
about a camper on a lot.
Right, the lot is so small that if he wanted to put a camper on it while something's being built there, a camper wouldn't fit. So.
There's a lot of
There's
scenarios.
There's a provision in the ordinance already for that. They can put it on an adjacent.
I mean, during this time of devastation, the more people we can keep in town that can get work done, that can help provide a service to our people, I don't really, and we know it's temporary, I just wanted to raise the question. We can find a lot of reasons if we think somebody's undesirable, I mean, if that's the question. I'm trying to accommodate people that are trying to get work done.
What we're actually asking then, if I hear you right, is can we as a homeowner, or maybe not the homeowner right in place, if a construction worker wants to bring his camper in because he's either working on the house or maybe the neighbor is across the street, and we're willing to let that temporary construction worker stay on your lot.
What if somebody works at the hospital?
We don't
What
have
if
a hospital.
Well, we got people that, I'm just trying, what's this construction?
Well, that's what I
thing
kind of
that-
heard from you in going through, I was trying to paraphrase what I heard, I'm sorry. I wasn't picking on that, I thought I heard that as a lot, but.
But I think it opens it up for that, for any type situation. I think it create, you know, I mean, I've had stuff stolen that I just put down there. I just think it may open up to some problems.
Well, it's gonna help a lot of people.
Well, we've got
It's gonna
citizens,
help a
what do
lot
our
of people.
citizens say?
Okay, moving on, I don't have anything else. Motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Thank you.
And so we.
I'm almost done with this. Can you take
Nobody's-
by four o'clock.
The grant?
Yeah, see, take a quick look at it, and then take it down there, and have a look at it.
Yeah, well, yeah, if you wanna run it, then bring it, then
I'm gonna
take it to
I'm
them.
not, what Dr. Rand, can I send it to you? Yeah. Okay. I'm sending it now.